On January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI was beheaded by the guillotine, one day after he was convicted for conspiracy with foreign powers by the National Convention. He was executed in Place de la Revolution in Paris. Louis was unprepared to rule France during a time of intense turmoil. He failed to establish a plan that would help France out of the many financial problems it was facing because of his grandfather. In August of 1792, Louis and Marie Antoinette were arrested by the sans-culottes and taken to prison. Evidence of him working with Austria and other foreign nations in a counter-revolutionary activities were found, and he was placed on trial for treason by the National Convention. Then in January of the following year, he was convicted and condemned to death. On March 4th, 1793, the Vendée Revolt began, when the peasants of the Vendée department took up arms against the National Convention. This region was very religious, so the anti-religious revolution was received with little enthusiasm. The first major signs of turmoil occurred when the French government instituted the civil constitution of the clergy, which strictly controlled the Roman Catholic Church. The uprising was further instigated when the Conscriptions Act was introduced in February of 1793. On March 4, 1793, rioting formally commenced at Cholet, the capital of the region. On April 6, 1793, the Committee of Public Safety was established during one of the crises of the Revolution, when France was beset by foreign and civil war. This new committee was created to help defend France against both foreign and domestic enemies. When the committee began, it had 9 members, but it later grew till 12. Its members were elected by the National Convention for a term of 1 month, then they were eligible for re-election. From April until July 10, 1793, the Committee of Public Safety was controlled by Georges Danton and his followers, who had a policy of moderation and reconciliation. However, they failed to work adequately with the precarious military situation. On July 10, 1793, Danton and his followers were replaced by more aggressive radicals, including Maximilien Robespierre. On May 7, 1794, Robespierre created the Cult of Supreme Being, which was meant to replace the state of religion of the time, Roman Catholicism. To win support of the Cult of Supreme Being, Robespierre organized the Festival of the Supreme Beings in the summer of 1794. In his keynote speech, he explains his dream of civic religion, worshipping a deist supreme being.
A day forever fortunate has arrived, which the French people have consecrated to the Supreme Being. Never has the world which he created offered to him a spectacle so worthy of his notice. He has been reigning on the earth tyranny, crime, and imposture. He sees at this moment a whole nation grappling with all the oppressions of the human race, suspend the course of its heroic labors to elevate its thoughts and vows toward the great being who has given it the mission it has undertaken and the strength to accomplish it. Frenchmen, you war against kings. You are therefore worthy to honor divinity, being of beings, author of nature, the brutalized slave, the vile instrument of despotism, the perfidious and cruel aristocrat, outrages thee by his very invocation of thy name. But the defenders of liberty can give themselves up to thee, and rest with confidence upon thy paternal bosom. Being of beings, we need not offer to thee unjust prayers. Thou knowest thy creatures, proceeding from thy hands. Their needs do not escape thy notice, more than their secret thoughts. Hatred of bad faith and tyranny burns in our hearts with love of justice in the fatherland. Our blood flows for the cause of humanity. Behold our prayer. Behold our sacrifices. Behold the worship we offer thee.
Robespierre ordered lasted for less than 3 months, as it crashed on July 28, 1794 with his assassination.
On May 10, 1793, the Society of Revolutionary Republican Women was born. However, its life was brief, as it was banned a mere 5 months after its inception. The society was created by women and for women, women determined to stop internal enemies of the revolution. Its brief existence demonstrates a paramount aspect of the revolution. The revolution was dominated by men. On October 29, 1793, the women of the society approached the exclusively male National Convention, hoping to get rid of the red cap component of their dress code. The request met universal resistance, and a mere day later, Jean-Baptiste Amar of the Committee of Public Safety outlawed all women's political clubs. Robespierre and other members of the Mountain had been wary of the moderate Girondins for quite some time. Following King Louis's execution, Girondins had expressed concern about his rapid condemnation. They possessed a more holistic stance, maintaining that the guillotine was not always the answer. Their leniency, however, was not met with leniency. On May 31, 1793, several extremist radicals entered the National Convention, demanding the expulsion of the Girondins, who they asserted were not truly Republican. The complaints of these protesters went largely ignored until June 2nd, when around 20,000 came to the convention, forcibly removing the Girondins. In the days following the anti-Girondin insurrection, Robespierre wrote,
"There must be one will. It must either be a Republican or a Royalist."
In Robespierre's mind, any tolerance of Royalist sentiments was inexcusably anti-Republican. Jean-Paul Marat, a friend of Robespierre and Jacobin deputy to the convention, was among those who had little toleration for moderate republicanism. In his newspaper, The Friend of the People, he berated all enemies of radicalism. His fury, which inspired many, was loathed by Charlotte Corday, a Girondin sympathizer. She came to consider Marat the epitome of excessive radicalism and aimed to have him silenced. In July of 1793, Corday traveled to Paris with the intention of doing just that. She appeared at his apartment on July 13th of 1793, concealing a knife. Upon entry, she confronted him while he lay unsuspectingly in his bath, plunging the blade through his chest. The Constitution of 1793 was submitted to the National Convention on June 10, 1793, 8 days after the expulsion of the Girondins. It was the second constitution of the Revolution following the Constitution of 1791. The Constitution, which highlighted political democracy, was intended to complement the newly Republican government. It instituted universal male suffrage and eradicated previously established property requirements for voting and holding office.
In the following September, Bertrand Barré and Georges Danton called for further measures, marking the official beginning of the Reign of Terror.
The citizens are rising up against us in inestimable numbers, disregarding our laws and rules. We must have the ability to force them to comply. It is also good that you proclaim to all our enemies that we are determined to be continually and completely prepared for them. You have ordered 30 million francs placed at the disposal of the Minister of War in order to manufacture weapons. Decree that this emergency production cease only when the nation has given a gun to each citizen. Let us announce the firm resolution of having as many guns and almost as many cannon as there are sans-culottes. Let it be the Republic that puts a gun into the hands of the citizen, the true patriot, and let the Republic say to him, "The country entrusts this weapon to you for its defense. You will stand up for your country each month of the year, as well as any other time you are required to do so by the national authority. Let a gun be your most sacred object. Let each of us lose our life rather than our gun. I therefore ask that you decree at least 100 million francs to produce all kinds of weapons, because had we all our arms, we would all have marched. It is the lack of weapons that enslaves us. A country in danger will never be short of citizens. Therefore, let us make terror the order of the day."
Under the pretension of keeping the French citizens obedient, the Committee of Public Safety passed the Law of Suspects on September 17, 1793, which allowed for the imprisonment of anyone for essentially any reason. This imprisonment could have drastic results, even execution. This law required people to constantly carry a certificate that stated who they were. If they were caught without it, they would immediately be imprisoned and could even be executed. This law stemmed from French paranoia concerning the possibility of Austrian or Prussian terrorism. The University of Chicago estimates that over 30,000 people were executed as a result of this law. The Law of General Maximum was passed by the National Convention on September 29, 1793, with good intentions. There was an ongoing financial crisis plaguing the country and threatening many of the most impoverished citizens. This law set a maximum price of standard price for ordinary supplies such as grain, flour, meat, oil, onions, soap, firewood, leather, and paper. However, like many laws established during this era, there was a catch. If one decided not to obey this law, one could be put to death.
Early on, the church was suspicious in the eyes of the revolutionaries. They thought that people needed to choose between the Constitution and their church beliefs.
Taking legal steps on October 5, 1793, The convention created the French Republican calendar, which erased every cultural tie to the church. In this new 12-month calendar, months were named by the seasons. Days no longer had connections to the saints, and a 10-day week was implemented, completely removing Sunday, the Sabbath. In the same month, the revolutionaries outlawed all public acts of worship. Then on November 22, 1793, all churches in Paris were closed and all street names were renamed, using a Republican theme. During the same period, on October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette was beheaded for high treason, like her late husband, Louis XVI, who was killed in January of the same year. Then on November 3, 1793, Olympe de Gouges, a powerful figure of the women's rights movement and author of September 1791 book, Declaration of the Rights of Woman and of the Female Citizen, was also beheaded.
On January 11, 1794, French replaced Latin as the national language, as it was more accessible to the common person. As other countries started to abolish slavery, word spread slowly to France. Most of the original members of the Society of Friends of Blacks either fled the country or were killed for opposing Robespierre and the National Convention. 3 delegates of color spoke in front of the National Convention on February 4, 1794, provoking them to vote for the abolition of slavery. On June 10, 1794, the Law of 22 Prairial was passed. This law gave even more power to the Committee of Public Safety, which had grown in strength over the past 8 months. With the creation of this law, they now had more power than ever to arrest, try, and execute anyone who seemed untrustworthy. This reinforced much of what the law suspects had previously covered, but added an additional clause. This new clause gave the committee the power to prevent its detainees from calling witnesses of counsel, leaving them hopeless and forced to defend themselves. Furthermore, the law mandated citizens to report any suspicious behavior to the committee, whether the accused was a stranger or a dear friend. July 27, 1794, the Thermidorian reaction began during the month of Thermidor on the revolutionary calendar. The Thermidorians were members of the revolution who considered Robespierre a tyrant and wanted to create a more conservative republic. They began repealing the legislation of the Terror, particularly that of the Committee of Public Safety, within the next month. While they left the Committee of Public Safety in charge of the war effort, they reallocated its other responsibilities to several new committees. Additionally, they said that a quarter of the committee positions would be turned over each month to prevent the reaccumulation of power. They also repealed the policies of Robespierre's Jacobin regime, including the law of suspects and the law of 22 Prairial.
The Thermidorians held much animosity towards the Jacobins and Robespierre and his followers.
On July 28, 1794, Robespierre and 21 of his supporters were killed by the guillotine. A few were moderate Jacobins that abandoned or betrayed Robespierre. However, most came from the plain, the amorphous mass of deputies that occupied the floor of the convention. Because most of the members killed had little in common, the convention evolved into a strange and disjointed assembly lacking leadership and agreement.